We're going to read chapter 4 of Mice and Men right now. Remember at the end of chapter 3, Curly came into the bunkhouse and started a fight with Lenny. And Lenny responded by just catching Curly's hand in his fist. And he squeezed so hard that he broke all the bones in Curly's hand. George and Lenny are worried they're going to get fired for this. But Slim makes a deal with Curly, and he says, if you don't tell anyone what happened, we won't either, because he knows that Curly will be ashamed if it gets out and about that he got beat by Lenny, I guess is the best way to say it. So anyways, everyone has left to go take Curly into town. Well, Slim and I think Carlson are the ones that left to take Curly into town to a doctor. Okay, so we're here back at the ranch with the people who stayed behind. Okay, so we're going to learn about Crooks. Crooks is the stable buck. He's the African-American character in the book. And we're going to hear kind of like how racism was played out in this time period. Remember, this is like during the Great Depression. So, like the 1930s, basically. And of course, racism was a thing then because the civil rights movement hadn't even happened yet and stuff like that. Okay, so we'll see kind of how Crooks is treated here on the ranch because of the fact that he's Black. Crooks, the Negro stable buck, had his bunk in the harness room, a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. On one side of the little room there was a square four-paned window, and on the other a narrow plank door leading into the barn. Crooks's bunk was a long box filled with straw, on which his blankets were flung. On the wall by the window there were pegs on which hung broken harness in process of being mended, strips of new leather, and under the window itself a little bench for leather working tools, curved knives, needles, and balls of linen thread, and a small hand riveter. On pegs were also pieces of harness, a split collar with a horsehair stuffing sticking out, a broken hame, and a trace chain with its leather covering split. Crooks had his apple box over his bunk, and in it a range of medicine bottles, both for himself and for the horses. There were cans of saddle soap and a drippy can of tar with its paintbrush sticking over the edge, and scattered about the floor were a number of personal possessions. For being alone, Crooks could leave his things about, and being a stable buck and a cripple, he was more permanent than the other men, and he had accumulated more possessions than he could carry on his back. Okay, so Crooks has his bunk kind of like in the room where they fix all of the harnesses and all the different pieces of equipment for the horses. And that's okay for Crooks because he is the stable buck. He's the one that takes care of most of those things when it comes to the horses. Also, his bunk is out here because it wasn't considered appropriate for him to be in the same bunkhouse with the white men. Okay, so even though I'm sure this is meant to be a slight to Crooks, I feel like I would rather have privacy and have my own little place, even if it is out in the by the stables. But I don't know, like maybe you feel differently. Crooks possessed several pairs of shoes, a pair of rubber boots, a big alarm clock, and a single-barreled shotgun. And he had books, too, a tattered dictionary and a mauled copy of the California Civil Code for 1905. There were battered magazines and a few dirty books on a special shelf over his bunk. A pair of large gold-rimmed spectacles hung from a nail on the wall above his bed. The room was swept and fairly neat, for Crooks was a proud, aloof man. He kept his distance and demanded that other people keep theirs. His body was bent over to the left by his crooked spine, and his eyes, and because of their depth, seemed to glitter with intensity. His lean face was lined with deep black wrinkles, and he had thin, pain-tightened lips, which were lighter than his face. So he's a fairly clean man. His room is really neat and clean. He keeps it swept and things like that. And we also learned that he's kind of, I wouldn't call him shy. The book calls him aloof. Aloof is kind of like where you keep your distance from people just because you want to, like you act like you don't like all the other people around you. Yeah, okay. It was Saturday night. Through the open door that led into the barn came the sound of moving horses, of feet stirring, of teeth chomping on hay, of the rattle of halter chains. In the stable buck's room, a small electric globe threw a meager yellow light. Crooks sat on his bunk. His shirt was out of his jeans and back. In one hand he held a bottle of liniment, and with the other he rubbed his spine. Now and then he poured a few drops of the liniment into his pink-palmed hand and reached up under his shirt to rub again. He flexed his muscles against his back and shivered. Noiselessly, Lenny appeared in the doorway and stood there looking in, his big shoulders nearly filling the opening. For a moment Crooks did not see him, but on raising his eyes he stiffened and a scowl came on his face. His hand came from under his shirt. Okay, so liniment is like ointment, and Crooks is rubbing this on his back. We know that Crooks has a crooked spine, which is probably why he's nicknamed Crooks. And I misspoke earlier when I said that they were all taking Curly to the doctor. That is not true. It is Saturday night, and all the men have gone out to that cat house that we talked about in a previous chapter. Okay, this is where you can go drink, hang out, you can get a prostitute if you want to, and everyone is gone, even George. Okay, so Lenny is here, so is Crooks, and Lenny kind of just, like walks into the doorway of Crooks's place. Immediately, Crooks seems like he's not happy about this. Lenny smiled helplessly in an attempt to make friends. Crooks said sharply, "You got no right to come in my room. This here's my room. Nobody got any right in here but me." Lenny gulped and his smile grew more fawning. "I ain't doing nothing," he said. "Just come to look at my puppy, and I seen your light," he explained. "Well, I got a right to have a light. You go on and get out of my room. I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse, and you ain't wanted in my room." "Why ain't you wanted?" Lenny asked. "'Cause I'm black. They play cards in there, but I can't play because I'm black. They say I stink. Well, I tell you, all of you stink to me." Lenny flapped his big hands helplessly. "Everybody went into town," he said. "Slim and George and everybody. George says I gotta stay here and not get in no trouble. I seen your light." "Well, what do you want?" "Nothing. I seen your light. I thought I could just come in and set." Okay, so Lenny, we already know that he's kind of childlike in the way that he interacts with people, and he doesn't understand that there's different rules because of racism, and so he's just like, "Everyone's gone. I saw your light on, so I came in just to sit and like talk to you. Can I?" Okay, Crooks almost has like a wall up because he's like, "I'm not allowed in your bunkhouse, so you're not allowed in here with me." Crooks stared at Lenny and he reached behind him and took down the spectacles and adjusted them over his pink ears and stared again. "I don't know what you're doing in the barn anyway," he complained. "You ain't no Skinner. They's no call for a bucker to come into the barn at all. You ain't no Skinner. You ain't got nothing to do with the horses." "The pup," Lenny repeated. "I come to see my pup." "Well, go see your pup then. Don't come in a place where you're not wanted." Lenny lost his smile. He advanced a step into the room, then remembered and backed to the door again. "I looked at him a little. Slim says I ain't to pet him very much." Crooks said, "Well, you've been taking him out of the nest all the time. I wonder the old lady don't move him someplace else." "Oh, she don't care. She'd let me." Lenny has moved into the room again. Crooks scowled, but Lenny's disarming smile defeated him. "Come on in and set a while," Crooks said. "Long as you won't get out and leave me alone, you might as well set down." "All the boys gone into town, huh?" "All but old Candy. He just sits in the bunkhouse sharpening his pencil and sharpening and figuring." Crooks adjusted his glasses. "Figuring? What's Candy figuring about?" Lenny almost shouted, "About the rabbits." "You're nuts," said Crooks. "You're crazy as a what? What rabbits you talking about?" Okay, hold on. Okay, so we know that Candy is in the bunkhouse, and Lenny says he's just writing things down and figuring and figuring. Okay, and Kirk says figuring about what, and Lenny says about the rabbit. Okay, he's going to give some information that he should not be giving to Crook. Because remember when George, Lenny, and Candy decided they were going to do the whole little cabin thing, they decided not to tell anyone else. But Lenny, he doesn't remember, and he's really excited about the rabbit, so he's going to go ahead and tell some information here. Um, you're crazy as a what? What rabbits are you talking about? The rabbits we're going to get, and I get to tend them, cut grass and give them water, and like that. Just nuts, said Crooks. I don't blame the guy you travel with for keeping you out of sight. Lenny said, it ain't no lie. We're gonna do it. We're gonna get a little place and live off on the fat of the land. Crooks settled himself more comfortably on his bunk. Sit down, he invited. Sit down on the nail keg. Lenny hunched down on the little barrel. You think it's a lie, Lenny said, but it ain't no lie. Every word's the truth, and you can ask George. Crooks put his dark chin into his pink palm. You travel around with George, don't ya? Sure, me and him goes every place together. Crooks continued. Sometimes he talks, and you don't know what the hell he's talking about. Ain't that so? He leaned forward, boring Lenny with his deep eyes. Ain't that so? Yeah, sometimes. Just talks on, and you don't know what the hell it's all about. Yeah, sometimes, but not always. Crooks leaned forward over the edge of the bunk. I ain't a Southern Negro, he said. I was born right here in California. My old man had a chicken ranch, about 10 acres. The white kids come to play at our place, and sometimes I went to play with them. And some of them were pretty nice. My old man didn't like that. I never knew till long later why he didn't like that, but I know now. He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. There wasn't another colored family for miles around, and now there ain't a colored man on this ranch. And there's just one family in Soledad. He laughed. If I say something, why, it's just a black man saying it. Lenny asked, how long do you think it'll be before them pups will be old enough to pet? Okay, so Brooks makes the observation that George probably talks to Lenny about a bunch of stuff, and sometimes Lenny doesn't even understand what's being said to him. Okay, this is a perfect opportunity for Crooks. Crooks doesn't get to go in the bunkhouse. He doesn't really have friends. He doesn't have anyone he can talk to. And so he realizes if he does talk to Lenny about important stuff, Lenny won't go and repeat it because he can't even focus his mind on it. Which we can see proof of that because Crooks is telling him all about what it was like when he was growing up. He says, I'm not even from the South. I was born in California. When I was little, I used to play with the white children and I loved it. My old man hated it. Okay, so it just goes to show, like, even back then, as children are not born with their racism, right? Okay, so he's trying to, like, explain this to Lenny, and Lenny is just, he only wants to know how long till I can pet the puppies, right? So that tells us that he's not even really paying attention to what Chris says. This is going to encourage Crooks to talk to him about more stuff. Crooks laughed again. If I can talk to you and be sure you won't go blabbing. A couple of weeks and them pups will be all right. George knows what he's about. Just talks and you don't understand nothing. He leaned forward excitedly. This is just a black man talking and a busted back black man, so it don't mean nothing, see? You couldn't remember it anyways. I've seen it over and over. A guy talking to another guy, and it don't make no difference if you don't hear or understand. The thing is, they're talking. Or they're set and still not talking. Don't make no difference. No difference. His excitement had increased until he pounded his knee with his hand. George can tell you screwy things and it doesn't matter. It's just the talking. It's just being with another guy. That's all. Okay, so Crooks is saying, I can talk to you about anything and you wouldn't tell anybody. Because sometimes it doesn't really matter if anyone's listening to you or not. It just your feelings and your thoughts out. Okay, so he even says George can probably tell you really inappropriate things and nothing happens because you don't listen or you don't go tell on him. His voice grew soft and persuasive. Suppose George don't come back no more. Suppose he took a powder and just ain't coming back. What do you do then? Lenny's attention came gradually to what had been said. What? He demanded. I said, suppose George went into town tonight and you never heard of him no more. Crooks pressed forward some kind of private victory. Just suppose that, he repeated. He won't do it, Lenny cried. George wouldn't do nothing like that. I've been with George a long time. He'll come back tonight. But the doubt was too much for him. Don't you think he will? Crooks's face lighted with pleasure in his torture. Nobody can't tell what a guy'll do, he observed calmly. Let's say he wants to come back and can't. Suppose he gets killed or hurt so he can't come back. Lenny struggled to understand. George won't do nothing like that, he repeated. George is careful. He won't get hurt. He ain't never been hurt because he's careful. Well, suppose he don't come back. What'll you do then? Okay, I don't really know why Crooks is being mean to Lenny like this, saying, well, what if George never comes back? My only thing that I can think of is that maybe Crooks wants to kind of like, because he's so lonely and he doesn't have friends, he kind of wants like other people to have to feel that way. I'm not too sure, but he can tell that it's having an effect on Lenny, and so he keeps on with it. Lenny's face wrinkled with apprehension. I don't know. Say, what you doing anyways? He cried. This ain't true. George ain't hurt. Crooks bored in on him. Want me to tell you what'll happen? They'll take you to the booby hatch. They'll tie you up with a collar like a dog. Suddenly, Lenny's eyes centered and grew quiet and mad. He stood up and walked dangerously towards Crooks. Who hurt George? He demanded. Crooks saw the danger as it approached him. He edged back on his bunk to get out of the way. I was just supposing, he said. George ain't hurt. He's all right. He'll be back all right. Lenny stood over him. What are you supposing for? Ain't nobody going to suppose no hurt to George. Crooks removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with his fingers. Just sit down, he said. George ain't hurt. Lenny growled back to his seat on the nail keg. Ain't nobody gonna talk no hurt to George, he grumbled. Crooks said gently, maybe you can see now. You got George. You know he's going to come back. Suppose you didn't have nobody. Suppose you couldn't go into the bunkhouse and play rummy because you was black. How'd you like that? Suppose you had to sit out here and read books. Sure, you could play horseshoes till it got dark, but then you gotta read books. Books ain't no good. I need somebody to be near him. He whined. The guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. It'll make no difference who the guy is, long as he's with you. I tell ya, he cried. I tell ya, a guy gets too lonely and he gets sick. Okay, so Crooks is saying that like, because he has to be alone all the time, it's almost like he's almost so lonely that he feels sick. Okay, and so this is why he said all that to Lenny to kind of like make Lenny see how it is for Crooks without any friends and stuff like that. So back to that whole loneliness theme that we've kind of been talking about as we go through the book. Obviously, Crooks is a very lonely character. He is like trying to illustrate to Lenny what it's like to be so lonely. All right, let's keep going. George's gonna come back, Lenny reassured himself in a frightened voice. Maybe George come back already. Maybe I better go see. Crooks said, I didn't mean to scare you. He'll come back. I was talking about myself. A guy sits alone out here at night and maybe reading books or thinking or stuff like that. Sometimes he gets thinking and he got nothing to tell him what's so and what isn't so. Maybe if he sees something, he don't know whether it's right or not. He can't turn to some other guy and ask him if he sees it too. He can't tell. He got nothing to measure by. seen things out here. I wasn't drunk. I don't know if I was asleep. If some guy was with me, he could tell me I was asleep, and then it would be all right, but I just don't know. Crooks was looking across the room now, looking toward the window. Okay, so Crooks was saying when you're all alone, you don't have anyone there to verify if what you're seeing is correct or not. Like if you see something really crazy and you turn to the guy next to you and you're like, hey, did you just see that? And if that guy can say, yeah, I saw it too, and you know it was real and you know you're not crazy, right? If nobody else is around and you see something weird, there's no one there to like, do you see that too? So maybe sometimes you think you're going crazy and seeing things. Lenny said miserably, George wouldn't go away and leave me. I know George wouldn't do that. The stableback went on dreamily. I remember when I was a little kid on my old man's chicken ranch. Had two brothers. They was always near me, always there. Used to sleep right in the same room, right in the same bed, all three. Had a strawberry patch, had an alfalfa patch. Used to turn the chickens out in the alfalfa on a sunny morning. My brothers would sit on a fence rail and watch them. White chickens they was. Gradually, Lenny's interest came around to what was being said. George says we're going to have alfalfa for the rabbits. What rabbits? We're going to have rabbits and a berry patch? You're nuts. We are too. You asked George. You're nuts. Crooks was scornful. I've seen hundreds of men come by on the road and on the ranches with their bindles on their back and that same damn thing in their heads. Hundreds of them. They come and they quit and go on, and every damn one of them's got a little piece of land in his head. And never a damn one of them ever gets it. Just like heaven. Everybody wants a little piece of land. I've read plenty of books out here. Nobody never gets to heaven and nobody gets no land. It's just in their head. They're all the time talking about it, but it's just in their head. He paused and looked toward the open door, for the horses were moving restlessly, and the halter chains clinked. A horse whinnied. I guess somebody's out there, Kirk said. Maybe Slim. Slim comes in sometimes 2, 3 times a night. Slim's a real skinner. He looks out for his team. He pulled himself painfully upright and moved toward the door. That you, Slim? He called. Andy's voice answered. Slim went into town. Say, you seen Lenny? You mean the big guy? Yeah, seen him around any place? He's in here, Kirk said shortly. He went back to his bunk and lay down. Okay, so Crooks also is very negative about this idea of going and buying a little piece of land. He says every man that comes through here thinks he's going to do that, and nobody ever accomplishes it. They remember that we're in the Great Depression. It's really hard for a man to save up that much money, especially because they're not getting paid very much. And so Crooks is very, he just says, no, that's never going to happen. Everybody says they're getting land, but it never really happens. Okay, so now here comes Candy. We know that Candy is one of the other people that's in on the plan. So let's see if he's going to give Crooks more information or if he's going to get mad at Lenny for telling. Candy stood in the doorway, scratching his bald wrist and looking blindly into the lighted room. He made no attempt to enter. Tell you what, Lenny, I've been figuring out about them rabbits. Crooks said irritably, you can come in if you want. Candy seemed embarrassed. I don't know. Of course, if you want me to. Come on in. If everybody's coming in, you might just as well. It was difficult for Crooks to conceal his pleasure with anger. Okay, so Crooks acts mad, but he's actually kind of happy because he never has visitors. Candy came in, but was still embarrassed. You've got a nice, cozy little place in here, he said to Crooks. Must be nice to have a room all to yourself this way. Sure, said Crooks. And a manure pile under the window. Sure, it's swell. Lenny broke in. You said about them rabbits? Andy leaned against the wall beside the broken collar while he scratched the wrist stump. Been here a long time, he said. And Crook's been here a long time. This is the first time I ever been in his room. Crook said darkly, guys don't come into the colored man's room very much. Nobody been here but Slim. Slim and the boss. Candy quickly changed the subject. Slim's as good a skinner as I ever seen. Lenny leaned toward the old swamper. About them rabbits? He insisted. Candy smiled. I got it figured out. We can make some money on them rabbits if we go about it right. But I get to tend them, Lenny broke in. George says I get to tend them. He promised. Brooks interrupted brutally. You guys is just kidding yourselves. You'll talk about it a hell of a lot, but you won't get no land. You'll be a swamper here till they take you out in a box. Hell, I've seen too many guys. Lenny here'll quit and be on the road in 2 3 weeks. Seems like every guy got land in his head. Candy rubbed his cheek angrily. You're damn right we're gonna do it. George says we are. We got the money right now. Yeah? Said Crooks. Okay, so it looks like Candy is going to make things even worse because he's going to tell some stuff to Crooks too. If George is here, George would definitely be telling them both to shut up. Yeah, said Crooks. And where's George now? In town in a whorehouse. That's where your money's going. Jesus, I've seen it happen too many times. I've seen too many guys with land in their head. They never get none under their hand. Candy cried. Sure they all want it. Everybody wants a little bit of land, not much. Just something that was his. He could live on, and there couldn't nobody throw him off. I never had none. I planted crops for damn near everybody in this state, but they wasn't my crops. And when I harvested them, it wasn't none of my harvest. But we gonna do it now, and don't make no mistake about that. George ain't got the money in town. The money's in the bank. Me and Lenny and George, we gonna have a room to ourselves. We're going to have a dog and rabbits and chickens. We're going to have green corn and maybe a cow or a goat. He stopped, overwhelmed with his picture. Crooks asked, You say you got the money? Damn right, we got most of it. Just a little bit more to get. Have it all in 1 month. George got the land all picked out too. Crooks reached around and explored his spine with his hand. Never seen a guy really do it, he said. I've seen guys nearly crazy with loneliness for land, but every time a whorehouse or a blackjack game took what it takes. He hesitated. If you guys would want a hand to work for nothing, just as keep, why, I'd come and lend a hand. I ain't so crippled I can't work like a son of a gun if I want to. Any of you boys seen Curly? They swung their heads toward the door. Looking in was Curly's wife. Her face was heavily made up. Her lips were slightly parted. She breathed strongly as though she had been running. Curly ain't been here, Candy said sourly. She stood still in the doorway, smiling a little at them, rubbing the nails of one hand with the thumb and forefinger of the other. And her eyes traveled from one face to another. They left all the weak ones here, she said finally. Think I don't know where they all went? Even Curly, I know where they all went. Okay, so she is smart, but she's kind of cruel because she notices that it's Candy and Crooks, which both of them are hurt and don't have like full use of their body, and then Lenny, who is like mentally handicapped. She's like, oh, I see they left all the weak ones here. Okay, she also says, I know where everybody is, even my husband Curly. Like, I know that he's out paying for a whore right now. Lenny watched her, fascinated, but Candy and Crooks were scowling down away from her eyes. Candy said, then if you know, why you want to ask us where Curly is? She regarded them amusedly. Funny thing, she said. If I catch any one man and he's alone, I get along fine with him. But just let two of the guys get together and you won't talk. Just nothing but mad. She dropped her fingers and put her hands on her hips. You're all scared of each other, that's what. Every one of you's scared the rest is going to get something on you. After a pause, Crooks said, maybe you better go along to your own house now. We don't want no trouble. Well, I ain't giving you no trouble. Think I don't like to talk to somebody every once in a while? Think I like to stick in that house all the time? Okay, so that's a part of Curly's wife that we haven't really seen. which is that she's lonely too. Okay, so we always thought that she's like trying to flirt or trying to get attention, which she is, but she's also stating that her life is really lonely too. Candy laid the stump of his wrist on his knee and rubbed it gently with his hand. He said accusingly, "You got a husband. You got no call fooling around with other guys causing trouble." The girl flared up. "Sure I got a husband. You all seen him. Swell guy, ain't he? Spends all his time saying what he's gonna do to guys he don't like, and he don't like nobody. Then I'm gonna stay in that 2x4 house and listen how Curly's gonna lead with his left twitch and then bring in the old right cross. 1-2, he says, just the old 1-2, and he'll go down." She paused, and her face lost its sullenness and grew interested. "Say, what happened to Curly's hand?" Okay, so we find out that Curly's wife doesn't even like Curly. She says all he does, like when they're together, all he does is talk about how he's going to beat people up. He's going to use his old 1-2 and knock people out. And she's so bored with it. Like she doesn't want to know about it anymore. And she also wants to know what happened to his hand. She's asking in kind of like a, hey, what happened to his hand? Like she thinks it's kind of funny that her husband got hurt. There was an embarrassed silence. Candy stole a look at Lenny, then he coughed. "Why, Curly got his hand caught in a machine, ma'am. Bust his hand." She watched for a moment and then she laughed. "Baloney. What you think you're selling me, Curly? Curly started something he didn't finish. Caught in a machine? Baloney. Why, he ain't give nobody the good old 1-2 since he got his hand bust." "Who bust him?" Candy repeated sullenly. "Got it caught in a machine." "All right," she said contemptuously. "All right, cover him up if you wanna. What do I care? You bindle bums think you're so damn good. What do you think I am, a kid? I tell you I could have went with the shows. Not just one, neither. And a guy told me he could put me in pictures." She was breathless with indignation. "Saturday night, everybody out doing something. Everybody. And what am I doing? Standing here talking to a bunch of bindle stiffs. A black man and a dum-dum and a lousy old sheep, and liking it because they ain't nobody else." Okay, so yeah, more of the same. She has no one to talk to. She insults all three of them, but still says she likes talking to them because there isn't anyone else. She says before she married Curly, she could have gone to the pictures. Okay, that's a funny way of saying to the films. Like she wanted to be a movie star. Like she wanted to be an actress in the films. And she's saying, "I could have done it too, but now I ended up here." Lenny watched her, his mouth half open. Crooks had retired into the terrible protective dignity of the Negro, but a change came over old Candy. He stood up suddenly and knocked his nail keg over backward. "I had enough," he said angrily. "You ain't wanted here. We told you ain't. And I tell ya, you got your floozy ideas about what us guys amounts to. You ain't got sense enough in that chicken head to even see that we ain't stiffs. Suppose you get us canned. Suppose you do. You think we'll hit the highway and look for another lousy two-bit job like this. You don't know that we got our own ranch to go to and our own house. We ain't got to stay here. We got a house and chickens and fruit trees and a place 100 times prettier than this. And we got friends. That's what we got. Maybe there was a time when we were scared of getting canned, but we ain't no more. We got our own land, and it's ours, and we can go to it." Okay, so it's bad enough that they told Crooks about it, but now, out of anger and indignation, Candy spills the plan to Curly's wife, and this is again because she's calling them like losers, basically, right? She's like, "Ugh, I'm just out here talking to you guys and I like it because there's nobody better." And this makes him puff up his pride, and that's why he tells her, like, "No, we've got a place and we're going to go to it." Curly's wife laughed at him. "Baloney," she said. "I've seen too many you guys. If you had 2 bits in the world, why, you'd be in getting 2 shots of corn with it and sucking the bottom of a glass. I know you guys." Candy's face had grown redder and redder, but before she was done speaking, he had control of himself. He was the master of the situation. "I might 'a' knew," he said gently. Maybe you just better go along and roll your hoop. We ain't got nothing to say to you at all. We know what we got, and we don't care whether you know it or not. So maybe you better just scatter along now. Because Curly maybe ain't gonna like his wife out in the barn with us bindle stiffs. She looked from one face to another, and they were all closed against her. And she looked longest at Lenny until he dropped his eyes in embarrassment. Suddenly she said, "Where'd you get them bruises on your face?" Lenny looked up guiltily. "Who, me?" "Yeah, you." Lenny looked to Curly for help, and then he looked at his lap again. "He got his hand caught in a machine," he said. Curly's wife laughed. "Okay, machine, I'll talk to you later. I like machines." Okay, so she notices that Lenny has the bruises, and that's when she realizes that it was Lenny that hurt Curly. Candy says, "No, it was a machine." And so Curly's wife laughs, and she looks at Lenny. She's like, "Okay, machine. Thanks, machine, for breaking my husband." Like she thinks it's funny. And she has definitely figured out that it was Lenny. Okay, so now this woman has a lot against them. Okay, if she wanted to, she could go to the boss and tell what really happened to Curly's hand. She could go to the boss and tell the boss that they're planning to leave and go buy a piece of land. Okay, so this is maybe the worst person for all of this information to have just been reported, especially because we know that even though everyone's like, oh, everyone always does that, no one ever actually does it, we know that they actually are within reach of doing it, right? So at this late stage in the planning, for them to have given this information to someone who could potentially ruin it for them, this is really bad, and George is not going to be happy about it. Candy broke in. "You let this guy alone. Don't you do no messing around with him. I'm going to tell George what you says. George won't have you messing with Lenny." "Who's George?" she asked. "The little guy you come with?" Lenny smiled happily. "That's him," he said. "That's the guy, and he's going to let me tend the rabbits." "Well, if that's all you want, I might get a couple of rabbits myself." Okay, that's a flirtation, like a direct pickup line, pretty much. Lenny says, "He's going to let me take care of the rabbits." And she's like, "Oh, if that's all you want, I'll just get some rabbits. You can take care of my rabbits." Crooks stood up from his bunk and faced her. "I had enough," he said coldly. "You got no rights coming in a colored man's room. You got no rights messing around in here at all. Now you just get out and get out quick. If you don't, I'm going to ask the boss not to ever let you come in the barn no more." She turned on him in scorn. "Listen," she said. "You know what I can do to you if you open your trap." Crooks stared hopelessly at her, and then he sat down on his bunk and drew into himself. She closed on him. "You know what I could do." Crooks seemed to grow smaller, and he pressed himself against the wall. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, you keep your place then. I could get you strung up on a tree so easy it ain't even funny." Okay, so she plays the race card. She's like, "Look, if I just went to the boss and said something mean about you, I could totally get you hanged. Like, we could take care of this right now, so stop talking to me." Okay, and so Crooks is actually in the right, asking her to get out, but because he's black, she threatens him, and immediately he retreats back into himself because he knows that because she's white and he's black, if she wanted to, she really could have him killed. And that's why he just completely shuts down after she says that. Crooks reduced himself to nothing. There was no personality, no ego, nothing to arouse either like or dislike. He said, "Yes, ma'am," and his voice was toneless. For a moment she stood over him as though waiting for him to move so she could whip at him again. But Crooks sat perfectly still, his eyes averted, everything that might be hurt drawn in. She turned at last to the other two. Old Candy was watching her fascinated. "If you was to do that, we'd tell," he said quietly. "We'd tell about you framing Crooks." "Tell him be damned," she cried. "Nobody'd listen to you, and you know it. Nobody'd listen to you." Candy subsided. "No," he agreed. Nobody listened to us. Lenny whined, I wish George was here. I wish George was here. Candy stepped over to him. Don't you worry none, he said. I just heard the guys coming in. George will be in the bunkhouse right now, I bet. He turned to Curly's wife. You better go home now, he said quietly. If you go right now, we won't tell Curly you was here. She appraised him coolly. I ain't sure you heard nothing. Better not take no chances, he said. If you ain't sure, you better take the safe way. She turned to Lenny. I'm glad you bust up Curly a little bit. He got it coming to him. Sometimes I'd like to bust him up myself. She slipped out the door and disappeared into the dark barn. And while she went through the barn, the halter chains rattled, and some horses snorted, and some stamped their feet. Crooks seemed to come slowly out of the layers of protection he had put on. Was that the truth, what you said about the guys come back? He asked. Sure, I heard 'em. Well, I didn't hear nothing. The gate banged, Candy said, and he went on. Curly's wife can move quiet. I guess she had a lot of practice, though. Crooks avoided the whole subject now. Maybe you guys better go, he said. I ain't sure I want you in here no more. A colored man gotta have some rights even if you don't like 'em. Candy said, that girl didn't ought to have said that to you. It wasn't nothing, Crooks said dully. You guys coming in and setting made me forget. What she says is true. The horses snorted out in the barn and the chains rang and a voice called, Lenny, oh Lenny, you in the barn? It's George, Lenny cried. And he answered, Here, George, I'm right in here. In a second, George stood framed in the door, and he looked disapprovingly about. What you doing in Crooks's room? You hadn't ought to be in here. Crooks nodded. I told 'em, but they came in anyways. Well, why didn't you kick 'em out? I didn't care much, said Crooks. Lenny is a nice fella. Now Candy aroused himself. Oh, George, I've been figuring and figuring. I got it doped out how we can even make some money on them rabbits. George scowled. I thought I told you not to tell nobody about that. Candy was crestfallen. Didn't tell nobody but Crooks. George said, Well, you guys gotta get out of here. Jesus, seems like I can't go away for a minute. Candy and Lenny stood up and went toward the door. Crooks called, Candy? Huh. Remember what I said about hoeing and doing odd jobs? Yeah, said Candy, I remember. Well, just forget it, said Crooks. I didn't mean it. Just fooling. I wouldn't want to go to no place like that. Well, okay, if you feel like that. Good night. The three men went out of the door. As soon as they went through the barn, the horses snorted and the halter chains rattled. Crooks sat on the bunk and looked at the door for a moment, and then he reached for the liniment bottle. He pulled out his shirt and back, poured a little liniment in his pink palm, and reached around. He fell slowly to rubbing his back. Okay, so out of all the chapters in the book, chapter 4 is the best one in terms of the theme of this because we see how all these characters, Candy, Crooks, Lenny, how Curly's wife, how they're all really, really lonely characters, but all in very different ways. Okay, maybe Lenny's the only one in the situation who's not really lonely, partly because he has George, partly because he doesn't really know any difference. Okay, but we can tell that Candy, Curly's wife, Crooks are all very, very lonely, even though they have people around them all the time. Okay, so that's chapter 4.